Under the first stars north of Seenawan, an experienced guide delays a Saharan caravan by the length of one tightened knot. The desert may look ready for grand gestures, but his immediate problem is a water skin with the manners of a slow leak. You may subscribe, though only if these long evenings have honestly earned it, and tell me your location and local time. Let the room grow dim, settle comfortably, and come into the northern Sahara in 1845, where you are responsible for the next night stage toward a known oasis. The heat has eased, but the people, loaded camels and water cannot move until the damp seam is checked. You keep the lead string still while another adult presses the leather under the stars. This choice is immediate and reversible. Wait a few minutes now, or inherit the leak after departure. The Sahara offers a magnificent sky, and your first concern is whether a knot has developed opinions. The stitch holds under pressure. You touch the wet place once more, mark the skin by its position on the saddle, and let the first camel rise. The camp does not spring to life all at once. It changes by small sounds. A folded awning is rolled tighter. A wooden bowl knocks against a pack. Someone draws a rope through a loop and tests it twice. The ground beneath the shade has begun to cool, although the exposed stones still return the day's heat to your ankles. This is one stage on the northern approach towards Seenawan, and Gedame is in 1845. It is not a model for every Saharan route, every season, or every century. On this journey, during severe heat, the recorded rhythm was to leave in the afternoon or evening, move through much of the night, pause before dawn, and use a longer daytime halt. Your task is narrower than the history. You need to bring this particular line of people, camels, water, and freight to the next known point, without using the hottest hours for the hardest work. You walk from the lead string toward the rear. Several camels remain kneeling, their loads propped while the final ties are checked. One animal tests the ground with a forefoot and waits. Nobody needs a speech about departure. They need the front not to move until the rear is ready. You raise one hand, receive an answering gesture from the last group, and return to the lead rope. The suspicious water skin is not the only one that deserves attention. You turn each filled skin so the seams catch what little light remains. A dry surface proves less than people would prefer. Pressure changes after loading. Leather rubs against padding, and a neck that closes neatly in the shade may loosen when the container shifts. You press along the stitching with both thumbs. One skin gives no moisture at all. Another has an old repair that remains firm. The third is the one already marked by the damp place, and you move it where it can be reached at the first halt. A famous star can wait. The correctly tied water skin has seniority. Water discipline begins here, before anyone is thirsty enough to make it dramatic. A container is part of the route because its condition determines whether the planned reserve still exists. You do not invent an exact allowance for each person or animal. The surviving record does not give one, and no single ration would suit every route, load, season, or water point. Instead, you work with what this stage requires: sound skins, known halts, measured use, and an animal strong enough to carry the weight. The marked skin goes upright against a folded pad. You retie its neck, feel the seam once more, and remember exactly where it sits. A pale edge beneath the next saddle catches your eye. Two rigid pieces of freight should hang evenly, but the left side has settled lower. You ask the handler to keep the camel kneeling and loosen the girth before the weight can pull the whole arrangement farther out of line. The pieces are salt, valuable farther along the network, and troublesome in the immediate present. They do not bend around a saddle. They insist that rope, padding, and arithmetic make room for them. You lift the lower edge while another adult shifts the pad. The opposite side rises slightly in answer. Neither piece needs to be moved far, but both ties must be tested again. The animal turns its head with the calm expression of a creature that has heard many theories about trade and found none of them edible. You shorten the rear line, press the padding flat, and ask the camel to rise. Its weight changes in stages as folded legs straighten. The load tilts, settles, and finally hangs close enough to level. A poor balance would not merely inconvenience one handler. It could slow the rear, create another halt, rub the animal, or force a hurried correction after dark. The better choice is the dull one made now. You run a hand along both lashings, then send the camel into its place in the string. The next camel remains kneeling until the ropes beside its forelegs are clear. Raising loaded animals in sequence is less impressive than a line already moving beneath the stars, but it is how such a line becomes possible. One handler steadies the saddle, while another draws the lead rope forward. The camel unfolds slowly, pauses, and stands. You look first at the animal, then at the load. Its body supplies information that no distant glance can give. A foot placed awkwardly, a shoulder held stiffly, or a saddle pulled to one side would send the whole arrangement back to the ground. This camel stands evenly. The salt pair remains level enough. The front tie has not crossed the strap. The desert may be wide, but your authority at this moment is no wider than a few rope lengths. You cannot make the heat vanish, improve the next pool, or persuade freight to become lighter. You can prevent a knot from sitting where it will chafe. You can keep the lead from dragging before the rear is ready. You can notice that one animal needs another breath before it joins the line. The camel shows no interest in beautiful route theory. It accepts a correctly placed pad. You step away, signal the next handler, and let the sequence continue. Departure is not decided by darkness alone. You crouch near the shaded ground and feel the difference between the air there and the heat still held by exposed stone. The sun has gone, but the landscape has not instantly forgotten it. Waiting a little longer may save people and animals from spending water and effort too quickly. Waiting too long would surrender useful hours before the next known halt. The 1845 journey towards Seenawan was made during severe heat, and its record describes afternoon or evening starts, followed by long night movement. That working rhythm explains why the caravan waits for cooler hours, and you will feel it more clearly once the line is moving. The fiercest part of the day is removed from the main march. Cooler hours are spent on distance. Daylight heat is given to rest, repair, and shorter movement where the route allowed it. You stand and watch the last red light leave a low stony rise. The air along your face has changed. Behind you, the final camel is upright. The marked water skin remains accessible. The salt pair that shifted now hangs evenly. You do not announce a grand beginning. You lift the lead rope, take several measured steps, and wait until the first bell is answered by bells farther back. The front moves before it is wise to call the whole caravan moving. You walk slowly enough to hear whether the rear has actually followed. A bell sounds close behind, then another farther away. The final answer is late. You stop. Someone at the back is still clearing a rope from a kneeling animal. The delay is small and therefore worth repairing while it remains small. If the lead continues, the line will leave in sections and moonlight will acquire an administrative role it never requested. You hold the first camel where the ground is firm. The middle strings settle. A message passes back without shouting. Soon the delayed animal rises, its handler draws it into place, and the last bell begins to move at the same unhurried interval as the others. Order matters because a stretched caravan cannot share route signs, warnings, or halts as easily. It also makes every load problem more expensive. The guide at the front may know the intended branch, but that knowledge is useful only if the animals behind can follow the same turn before old tracks divide again. You look along the wavering line until the rear is no longer a separate event. Then you begin once more, keeping the pace modest enough that the whole caravan leaves together rather than merely the first half. A familiar star has risen into a position you recognize, and you note it without giving it sole command of the caravan. The surviving account for this stage names tracks, route markers, practiced eyes, and remembered ground. It does not name a particular star. The star here is a modest cue, plausible for a guide already familiar with the route and immediately checked against better documented signs. You lower your gaze. The track angle continues in the expected direction. The wind touches one side of your face. Ahead, the worn ground bends gently around a low rise that belongs in the remembered sequence. None of these signs is dramatic. Their agreement is useful. A guide who used only stars would be asked to cross a landscape that has been falsely emptied of its roads, wells, palms, stone heaps, settlements, and human memory. This route is not featureless, and you are not wandering through it. Other people have travelled here. Animals have pressed paths into the surface. Markers have been placed. Water points and stages have names known to those who use them. You let the star confirm rather than command. The lead camel takes the firmer branch. The rear follows the same shallow turn, and the ground agrees with the sky. The path beneath you is not a single neat road. It is a broad braid of camel tracks, some worn deeply, some fading, several running almost parallel before crossing or curling away. Richardson, the outside traveller whose account preserves this stage, admitted that practiced drivers could see signs that escaped him. His judgments about people often require caution. His description of the track system is direct and useful. You read the braid as recent movement laid over older movement. A firmer line carries fewer loose patches and keeps the loaded animals from stepping sideways. Another branch has been used, but it bends toward ground that does not fit the remembered stage. You do not need to identify every print. You need to choose the line whose direction, surface, and place in the sequence agree. The road is perfectly obvious once you know which of its many roads it is. You step onto the firmer branch and let the lead camel feel it. Its foot sinks less deeply, the salt pair behind remains steady. After several paces, you turn far enough to see the middle strings copy the choice. No one has to rush across the junction. The decision reaches the rear as a gradual bend in the caravan rather than a command thrown into darkness. A small heap of stones appears low beside the path. It would be easy to miss if you were searching only the sky or expecting a monument. The surviving account says such heaps were placed along parts of this route to point the way. Their usefulness came from being recognized within a known sequence, not from possessing any magic of direction. You slow without stopping. The stones stand where memory expects a marker after the braided tracks. The wind still agrees with the general line. The low rise behind has fallen to the proper side. Ahead, the ground opens in the way it should before the next shallow basin. One marker cannot carry an entire route. It can confirm that several smaller judgments have not drifted apart. You pass close enough to see that the heap is deliberate. Then leave it untouched for the next traveller who knows what it means. The caravan follows at the same pace. A bell gives one low note when an animal shifts its load, but the rhythm does not change. You glance back toward the corrected salt pair, see it hanging level, and return your attention to the ground. The stone heap has done its quiet work. It has not told you where to go. It has agreed that you are already going there. The wind is not a compass needle, and you do not treat it as one. It is another familiar pressure in a set of observations. You turn your face slightly, feel the breeze arrive from the expected quarter, and compare it with the ripple of loose sand along the harder ground. Modern observations among Saharan guides emphasize landmarks, relief, rock, sand color, wind, and a continually updated sense of position. They also warn against assuming that every guide in every period traveled at night or used the stars in the same way. That warning belongs beside your present choice. Your unnamed star is 1Q. The route beneath your feet carries more of the decision. The scarf edge lifts against one shoulder. The low ridge remains where memory places it. The braided tracks continue on the chosen line. Wind, ground, and remembered stage agree closely enough that no correction is needed. The wind submits its report without waiting to be thanked. You keep your hand low on the rope. The people nearest you can see that the pace has not changed, and that steadiness passes backward. A dramatic turn would be harder to undo. A measured continuation leaves room for the next sign to confirm or challenge the choice. The caravan moves on, not because one element has spoken loudly, but because several quiet elements have said the same thing. The path bends a little more than you expect. You do not drag the lead camel sharply back toward an imagined straight line. Instead, you angle the front by a small degree and hold the pace until the middle strings copy it. A route is not improved by looking straight on a modern map. It follows usable ground, approaches water, avoids unnecessary strain on loaded animals, and inherits the choices of travelers who have crossed before. The slight bend may be part of the path rather than evidence that the path is wrong. You watch the rear through the space between two camels. The line changes shape gradually. No load swings hard. No handler has to run. The corrected salt pair remains quiet. The damp water skin stays upright against its pad. Useful authority often looks like this. A small adjustment made early enough that it disappears into ordinary walking. Nobody will remember it as a rescue. That is precisely its success. After several minutes, the low ridge and the track angle sit more comfortably together. You ease the lead back into its normal position. The correction has reached the final strings without breaking the caravan into separate groups. Ahead, the ground opens and the stars remain clear. You continue at the same measured pace, allowing the route to prove itself one feature at a time. Soon the work settles into repetition. Step, glance, listen, count. The lead rope changes pressure as the camel places each foot. Bells answer at different distances. The track stays visible in pale fragments. A handler behind you coughs once, then the line returns to its low rhythm. This is why the caravan travels after sunset on this stage. The night is not chosen for mystery. It is chosen because the fiercest heat belongs to the hours now behind you. Cooler air allows people and working animals to move more steadily. Water remains sealed longer because the march demands less immediate recovery. The daytime halt becomes part of travel rather than time lost from it. The clever secret of night travel is mostly that noon has been removed from the appointment. That does not make the stage effortless. Loads still shift, feet still tire, a route still has to be read. Water ahead may be limited, and the caravan must arrive ordered enough to use it. Night travel works only when timing is joined to animal pace, container care, halts, and practiced knowledge. You feel the answer through the rope rather than as a lesson. The camel keeps its even step. The rear bells remain close enough to hear. The cooler hours are being spent on distance, and the caravan is preserving strength by refusing to hurry. A rider near the front asks for a quicker pace. The ground is firm, the air has cooled, and the palms of Seenawan are still somewhere ahead. It is tempting to lengthen the line. You decline. A caravan's speed is not set by the freshest rider or the lightest animal. It is set by loaded camels, uneven places, the condition of people on foot, and the need for the rear to share the same route decisions. A faster front would merely create a slower caravan once the first gap demanded a halt. The lead camel walks at a pace close to the 3 miles an hour that Richardson later estimated for such travel. But you do not turn that rough observation into a fixed rule. Ground and load decide the actual movement. Tonight, the useful pace is the one the salt slabs can keep without swinging, and the rear can keep without straining. Impatience is required to travel at the camel's speed. You listen for the last bell. It remains present. The rider gives up a few lengths of ambition and falls back beside his group. Ahead, the path narrows between patches of rougher ground. Your slower choice lets the strings pass without crowding. By the time the route opens again, the caravan has lost no useful time. It has simply avoided paying for speed twice. Cooler air can make thirst feel less urgent, but it cannot refill leather. When someone reaches toward a tied container before the planned halt, you ask which skin is being opened and why. There is no single universal ration to recite. Water use depends on the route, season, people, animals, load, next point, and condition of the containers. The practical discipline is to know what has been set aside for this stage and not let comfort turn the reserve into an uncounted collection of sips. The person has another vessel assigned for immediate use. The deeper reserve remains sealed. You check the knot and press the neck, then return the skin to its place. Cool air improves many things, but it does not refill leather. The decision is small and carries no accusation. People walking through the night need water. Working camels also need a plan that extends beyond the current hour. The guide's responsibility is not to deny need, but to keep present use connected to the next known water point. The marked skin with the repaired seam remains upright. No new dampness has appeared. You make a note in memory to inspect it at the first halt. Then you step back into the lead position, where the rope, the pace, and the sealed containers continue as parts of the same route. A dark line appears low on the horizon. It is long enough to invite an answer, and indistinct enough to punish a hurried one. Someone behind you asks whether those are the palms of Seenawan. You study the shape while the caravan continues. Palms should make an uneven fringe. Rock often holds a firmer, lower edge. This line seems too solid, yet the night can flatten both stone and trees into the same narrow darkness. Its position also feels early. The track has not passed the shallow basin you remember before the approach. The Sahara is not featureless here. The route crosses stony rises, open plains, patches of sand, low ridges, and ground marked by traffic. Farther on, palms will matter as a sign of inhabited water. Each feature arrives in relation to the others. A distant shape becomes useful only when it joins the sequence. You do not answer the question yet. Instead, you keep the line on the left edge of the march and watch whether it changes as the angle closes. The lead camel continues on the selected track. Wind and marker still agree. Nothing requires a turn. Wishful seeing is not allowed to spend the caravan's direction. You let several hundred steps pass and wait for the dark shape to become more specific. The dark line grows taller, only because the caravan is closer. Its upper edge remains continuous. No narrow crowns separate against the sky, and the track does not begin to gather the local crossings you expect near an oasis. Stone then, not palms. The decision is useful even though it gives nobody the answer they hoped for. A guide spends much of a stage refusing attractive interpretations before accepting the one that fits. The ridge now becomes a confirmed landmark. Its length, angle, and position can be compared with the remembered approach to Seenawan. The desert has supplied a landmark, merely not the one everyone ordered. You tell the nearest handler what it is, and keep the ridge to the proper side. The correction required is almost none. That is another sign the earlier branch was sound. The marked water skin remains upright. The rear bell stays within hearing. The salt load corrected at camp still hangs evenly. As the caravan moves past the ridge, its dark edge begins to break against nearer ground. The false answer has done honest work. It has narrowed where you are within the stage and made the later palms easier to judge. Ahead, the route bends toward the hollow that should come next. You maintain the same measured pace and allow disappointment to become information. Moonlight reaches the ground in a clearer patch and reveals two worn branches. One continues straight across looser sand. The other curves slightly, then returns toward the remembered bearing. You stop long enough to study where the prints overlap. The curved branch shows firmer traffic and fewer places where loaded animals have slipped sideways. It also fits the route sequence better. The straight line may serve another local movement or an older approach. A visible path is not automatically your path. The people immediately behind you wait without crowding. The lead camel lowers its head and shifts one foot. You choose the curved branch. Night visibility comes in fragments. A guide uses the fragments while they are available, then carries the decision forward in memory. The moonlight does not remain fixed over the tracks, but the angle of the turn has already been shared by the front string. The middle follows. The rear receives the same curve before the ground grows dull again. No one has wandered across blank dunes, guided by a lonely star. You have used moonlight on tracks. A remembered stage, the position of a ridge, the feel of the wind, and the earlier stone heap. The star remains above them as one quiet confirmation. You take the branch that brings the ground back into agreement. One bell behind you falls out of rhythm. It does not stop, but each note arrives a little later than the one before. You turn, see a widening dark interval between strings, and halt the lead. A rear load has loosened, the handler has slowed rather than letting the slab swing harder, which is the right decision. The front stands while the middle closes the space. Rope passes through hands, the camel kneels. A pad is pulled back into place, and the rear lashing shortened. A single bell has filed a complaint from the rear. Keeping a caravan compact after dark is partly visual and partly acoustic. You cannot always see the last animal, but a changed bell interval tells you that spacing has become a problem. The sound does not identify the fault. It tells you where attention is needed. The repair is complete before the stop becomes a camp. The animal rises. Its load settles without the former pull. You wait for 3 even bell notes, then begin again. The pause costs a few cooler minutes and saves many more. The route signs remain shared because the rear has not become a separate party. People resume their places without rushing. The bell returns to its expected distance, and the caravan continues as one line rather than several stories moving through the same night. You choose the first proper halt on firm ground where the camels can kneel without unloading. The stop is brief by design. Animals fold their legs beneath packed saddles. People sit or lie close to their groups. Lead ropes are coiled where they will not be crossed at the restart. Historical accounts from this route describe short halts before dawn and longer daytime rests. A packed camel might remain ready while people slept for a little while. The exact arrangement varied, but the principle is plain. Not every rest required rebuilding the entire caravan. You count the strings before sitting. The last group arrives from the darkness and settles on the firm patch. Bells become separate notes, then stop as animals find stillness. The quiet is not empty, it has an order. You drink from the vessel assigned for immediate use, not from the sealed reserve. The marked water skin is brought forward. The repaired seam shows one bright bead of moisture. It has not failed, but it has requested additional supervision. You tighten a wrap around the stitched place and move the skin so its weight will not press directly on the repair. Then you sit with the laid rope beside your knee. The halt gives legs and hands relief while preserving the ability to rise quickly. No one has arrived anywhere. The stage has simply been made workable for another stretch. For a few minutes, looking becomes less useful than listening. The animals nearest you breathe steadily. A rope creaks when one shifts. Farther back, a voice answers another, and the final bell settles into silence. A compact caravan can be counted in sound after dark. The last group should arrive from the direction expected. A warning should travel forward without becoming a chain of shouts. The absence of a bell where one ought to be can matter as much as a bell sounding too far away. You hear a late pair of footsteps and wait. 2 adults from the rear reach the firm ground, one carrying a loose strap that has already been removed from use. They report that the replacement is tied and the animal is standing comfortably. The damaged strap will be dealt with in daylight when repair is easier. The report changes nothing dramatic. It closes a practical question. The rear is present, the load is secure. The route behind has not split the caravan. You listen once more. The wind passes over the low ground. A camel sighs with such depth that it appears to have reviewed the entire evening and found it needlessly complicated. Then the quiet settles again. Before the restart, you stand, walk the length of the first string, and confirm that the people nearest you have also had enough rest to move without haste. You return to the watched water skin before anyone begins raising the camels. The damp bead has not spread, but the old stitching is taking pressure from the way the container rests. You loosen the lower tie, fold another strip of cloth beneath the seam, and bind the wrap more firmly. A repair made once is not a repair forgotten. Leather, wind, motion, and weight keep testing it. The useful habit is repeated inspection at moments when the water can still be transferred or the pressure changed. You tilt the skin and wait. No new moisture appears. The water skin has not failed. It has requested additional supervision. You ask another adult to hold it while the camel rises. Then watch how the full weight settles. The new padding keeps the seam away from the saddle edge. The neck remains tight. The skin can travel, though it will stay where you can reach it. Nobody needs an exact distance here. What matters is that the next known water has not yet been reached, and the reserve must remain usable until it is. You run your thumb over the repair one final time, then retie the outer cover. The object returns to the load not as a solved problem, but as a watched one. That distinction is part of competent travel. The restart begins from the rear this time. A message passes forward as each string is ready. Camels rise in sequence, giving handlers space to clear ropes and check how the loads settle. The front waits until the last answer arrives. You draw the lead rope forward. The first camel unfolds its legs. Behind it, another rises, then another. A crossed line is caught before it tightens around an ankle. Someone lifts it free and lays it along the proper side of the pack. A quick restart is not a sudden one. Speed comes from order prepared during the halt. The containers are already assigned. The salt pair is already balanced. The damaged strap has been replaced. People know which animal they walk beside. When the final string is standing, you take several steps and pause. Bells begin at different distances, but within one compact line. No one is left kneeling. No load swings sharply. The marked skin remains upright. The caravan resumes with fewer words than it stopped. The track ahead is paler under the moon. You find the same branch followed before the halt and let the lead camel settle into its measured pace. Rest has not returned you to the beginning. It has continued the same ordinary goal. Reach the known oasis, while the cooler hours, the animals, and the reserve still agree. These are the coolest hours of the stage. The heat stored in the surface has finally thinned, and the air along the ground no longer presses against every movement. People who had walked heavily before the halt now find an easier rhythm. The camels keep the same pace, but the work required to maintain it feels smaller. This is where night travel earns its practical value. The caravan does not become faster in any heroic sense. It becomes less wasteful. Less effort is spent resisting the fiercest heat. Fewer stops are demanded by immediate discomfort. Water can remain tied until planned use rather than being opened merely to recover from noon. You use the advantage by refusing to squander it. The front does not race. The rear is not stretched. A load correction made in the cool still has to be checked with the same care as one made earlier. The guide's skill lies partly in knowing when an easier hour should remain easy. You listen to the bells, feel the rope, and let the animals cover ground at the pace their loads permit. The stars have moved. The low ridge is behind. Ahead, a shallow depression should appear before the final approach to Seenawan. You spend the cooler interval on steady distance, preserving enough order that the caravan can recognize and use the next sign when it comes. Before the ground drops, you expect it to. The path has been descending almost imperceptibly, and the remembered sequence places a shallow hollow beyond the second marker. You look for its rim rather than waiting to find yourself inside it. The pale surface opens ahead. One side is softer, where old movement has churned the edge. The other is firmer and carries a clearer line of tracks. You guide the lead toward that margin. Route knowledge often works as anticipation followed by confirmation. A guide remembers that one feature should come after another. A braid of tracks, a stone heap, a ridge held to one side, then a hollow crossed along a particular edge. None of these details alone is the route. Their order is. A guide is allowed one small satisfaction when the ground keeps its appointment. The first camels enter the depression without slipping. The salt loads remain steady. From the lower ground, the earlier ridge disappears, exactly as it should. When you climb the far margin, another line of worn traffic becomes visible. You do not celebrate. You use the confirmation. The next expected feature is a second low marker, followed later by the dark fringe of palms. You keep the caravan on the firmer edge and let the remembered hollow pass beneath the whole line before changing pace. The second heap of stones stands beyond the hollow, lower than a knee and slightly apart from the busiest tracks. You see it first as an interruption in the pale ground, then recognize the deliberate stack. The first marker confirmed one point in the stage. This one confirms an accumulated pattern. The track branch chosen under moonlight has crossed the hollow correctly. The wind has not contradicted the bearing. The ridge has fallen behind at the expected angle. Now the marker arrives where memory places it. You pass close enough to inspect the outline. No inscription is needed. No single community or century is assigned to the stones beyond what the account supports. Their role in this 1845 description is modest. Small heaps said to point out the way. The lead camel steps around them. You do not disturb the arrangement. For someone unfamiliar with the route, the marker might appear almost accidental. For someone carrying a remembered sequence, it reduces uncertainty without eliminating judgment. It is one more witness, not a master. You look beyond it. The horizon remains open and dark. Seenawan's palms are not yet certain. The people behind have been asking less often, which may be trust or simple fatigue. You let the marker fall behind and keep the pace even. The next answer should be taller, less solid and alive. At first the dark fringe could still be another low ridge. You watch how it changes as the caravan moves. Rock tends to hold a continuous edge. This shape rises and falls in narrow points. It does not spread sideways as quickly as the nearer ground, palms. The surviving account describes Seenawan's palms appearing as a small black object in moonlight a few hours after midnight. The outside traveller was eager enough to imagine immediate rest beneath them. You are less impressed by the romance and more interested in the approach. Palms are most persuasive when they remain palms after several hundred steps. You check the tracks. Local traffic has begun to multiply. The worn lines no longer behave like one long-distance branch. They cross toward gardens, animals, and dwellings. The air feels slightly different near lower, inhabited ground. But you do not let sensation replace the visible route. You tell the nearest handlers that the oasis is ahead, and ask them to shorten the spacing. Arrival can scatter a caravan as easily as departure, if everyone moves toward water at once. The marked skin still holds. The salt pair remains level. The rear bell is present. The palms grow distinct, their crowns separating against a lighter portion of sky. You have found the expected landform, but the guide's job is not finished. Known water must still be approached as a working place. Tracks multiply near Seenawan. Some lead toward the palms, others turn to small garden plots or animal enclosures, and several cross the caravan's line at angles that make the ground look busier than it did all night. You shorten the lead rope and slow the first string. An oasis is not vacant scenery placed for arriving travelers. Seenawan in the account was a small inhabited place with palms, patches of cultivation, animals, houses, and limited running water. The residents' daily life did not pause because a caravan had seen the trees. The slower approach protects both sides of that meeting. Loaded camels do not press into narrow paths. Containers do not swing against people coming from the settlement. The rear has time to close without rushing. One animal tries to turn toward a smell or sound beyond the route. Its handler brings the head back gently. Another bell answers from a side path, belonging to a camel that is not part of your line. You choose a waiting area on firmer ground near the palms, but not at the pool edge. From there, groups can be sent forward in order. The guide who spent the night combining stars, tracks, stones, wind, and remembered landforms now solves a less glamorous question: where to park. You bring the front to a halt and wait for the rear to arrive. The presence of water is easier to sense than its exact access. Cooler air gathers near the palms. The ground is darker in places. You can hear movement ahead, but the pools are not a broad open surface waiting for the caravan. Seenawan's water ran through small pools that served a tiny oasis community, as well as passing travelers. The account records that the supply could be strained sharply when a caravan watered its camels and filled its containers. Arrival therefore begins with looking at the approach, the footing, and the people already there. You leave most of the animals on firm ground and walk closer with two handlers. One side of the pool edge has been churned by hooves. Another offers better footing but less space. Residents are already drawing or waiting. A few camels from an earlier group stand near the water. You have reached the known point, but knowledge has not removed the need for manners or sequence. The reserve is still tied. The animals are still loaded. The water belongs to an inhabited system whose limits are visible. You choose the firmer waiting side and send a message back. No general rush forward. The first group will be selected by animal condition and load order. The smell of water has entered the caravan, but the lead rope remains in your hand. The queue forms before anyone formally creates it. Residents with containers occupy one part of the edge. Several camels wait under handlers. Your own people gather skins in small groups. Tired opinions arrive from all directions. The oasis is real, the water is real, and so is the queue. Richardson recorded that by the time the caravan took its supply and the camels drank, Seenawan's pools could be exhausted until the running water gathered again. That detail replaces the usual miracle of arrival with a practical limit. Water exists, but access and replenishment have a pace. You assign the first animals and keep the rest back. The choice is based on condition and the need to clear particular loads for later filling. No exact universal order is claimed. This is the immediate arrangement at this pool. On this arrival, one handler objects that his group has waited longest. Another points to a camel that carried the watched skin. You settle the matter by sending a small mixed group, enough to use the edge without crushing it. The first camels step down carefully. Their muzzles reach the water. Ripples push against the worn rim. Behind them, the remaining line stays on firmer ground. The caravan has reached water, but the payoff is not rescue. It is competent entry into a queue whose condition must be managed. You stand close enough to watch the footing while the first camels drink. Their eagerness does not justify allowing the whole string forward. A crowded edge could churn the approach, push animals sideways, and make filling containers harder for everyone. The selected group drinks, then must be moved clear before the next comes down. Handlers turn the animals one by one. Wet muzzles lift. Forelegs brace on the worn slope. Bells sound differently at the water, lower and less regular. Working camels are not scenery around the trade. Their condition sets pace, load, rest, and watering decisions. The guide who has preserved cooler hours now spends that advantage by refusing to create confusion at the final point. A second group moves forward. The pool level is lower and the surface more disturbed. You direct them to the firmer side. One animal tries to press past another and is brought back. The delay is ordinary. The queue at a known water point is ordinary. That ordinariness is what makes the route possible. When the second group finishes, you count them away from the edge. The camel carrying the marked water skin is among those now resting. Its load can be opened without blocking the pool. You send the next animals down and turn to the waiting containers. Containers come forward in batches after the first animals are clear. Empty skins fold easily and become awkward again as soon as they are filled. A handler holds each mouth while another manages the tie. The pool edge is muddy where hooves have worked it, so you reject that position and choose the cleaner inflow side. The marked skin is filled last among its group. You watch the repaired seam as the leather takes pressure. The new wrap darkens slightly from splashed water, but no bead forms along the stitching. The repair has survived the stage. water quality and capacity can vary even at known points. Elsewhere on the route, the 1845 account records a driver refusing water he judged bad, while camels drank eagerly. Here, the issue is not a heroic distinction between life and death. It is whether this container is sound, this position is clean enough, and the pool can continue serving those behind. You retie the neck and invert the skin briefly. It holds. The filled containers are carried away from the edge before the next batch arrives. The queue advances by a few places. Residents wait for the running supply to gather again where the pool has been drawn down. You set the watched skin upright in shade and finally remove your hand from it. The answer promised at the beginning lies around you in ordinary results. The people have arrived tired but organized. The camels have covered the main stage during cooler hours rather than under the fiercest daytime heat. The reserve has remained usable. Loads are still attached. The guide has reached a known water point without pretending that the sky alone carried the caravan there. You traveled after sunset because cooler conditions reduced strain on people and working animals and helped preserve water for the stage ahead. You used a familiar star as one cue, then checked it against tracks, stone markers, wind, a remembered hollow, ridges, local paths, and finally the dark fringe of palms. You managed pace, halts, spacing, rope, skins and freight as parts of the same decision. The desert was never empty along this route. The crossing depended on accumulated routes, placed markers, a small oasis community, running water, and people who knew how one stage connected to the next. At arrival, the practical problem was a queue and a strained pool, not a miraculous rescue. That detail matters, because it shows the route as work shared with an inhabited place. You look back at the resting strings. Camels fold their legs beneath loads. The repaired skin stands upright. You have arrived by work, not by wandering. Daylight will bring its own shorter movements, repairs and heat. For now, Seenawan provides shade, water that gathers slowly, and a place where the caravan can become still without becoming finished. You coil the lead rope beside the repaired skin. The salt pair that shifted before departure rests level across its padding. One handler has already loosened a strap so the animal can settle more comfortably. Another carries an empty vessel back toward the pool and joins the remaining queue. The route account that preserves this night rhythm also records daytime rest before later afternoon departures. The schedule is not a universal Saharan law. It is the working pattern of this journey under these conditions. Cooler movement, measured halts, morning travel where useful, and a longer pause against the worst heat. Palm shadow crosses the ground. The well edge remains worn and busy. Residents continue their own tasks around the limited water. The caravan has entered that ordinary life for a while and will leave it again. You place the rope where nobody will step across it. The guide's immediate promise has been paid. People, camels, water, and loads reached the known point in order. For now, the next stage can remain unstarted. Much earlier, on the western side of the Sahara, another journey begins with a container held toward the light. It is early 1352 at Sijil Masa, an oasis terminus where Ibn Battuta waited for the winter caravan, bought camels, and prepared to travel south. You are following a carefully composite adult assigned to water containers within that documented itinerary. No source gives this person a name or a formal office. The work itself is secure enough to follow. Skins must be inspected, filled, assigned, protected, and repaired before the caravan can treat a chain of water points as a route. You press one seam with a thumb. Palm shadow crosses the courtyard wall. Loaded saddles stand nearby, but this skin has not yet earned a place among them. A water tally is rarely admired until it is wrong. The ordinary goal is to leave Sijil Masa with sound containers and bring them through the next stages without confusing ownership, condition, or intended use. The friction is already present. One neck closes poorly. Two skins bear similar marks. A patched seam may be sound enough for a short interval, but not for the deeper reserve. You set the doubtful skin beside the repair tools and begin with the one most likely to cause an argument later. The caravan has waited for winter, but winter is not a single answer. It changes the balance of heat and travel without making the route simple. Ibn Battuta reached Sijil Massa in 1351 and remained there for months before departing in February 1352. He bought camels and joined an organized crossing rather than setting off alone across an abstract blank. You count the animals assigned to the merchant groups whose containers you are checking. The marks differ. Some are cut into thongs, others are tied in recognizable ways. The caravan will move together, but responsibility for animals, loads, and water remains distributed among households and partners. This seasonal choice belongs to the western itinerary from Sijil Massa toward Tagaza and farther south. It cannot be stretched across every route or century. Other caravans adjusted departure, rest, and travel hours to their own conditions. The animals nearest you have been watered, but not fully loaded. One shifts beneath an empty saddle and turns toward the palm grove. You compare the animal count with the skins arranged on the ground. The numbers agree for the first group. The second group is missing one assigned vessel. You find it beneath a folded awning, where someone placed it after an earlier repair. Winter has organized the departure. A misplaced skin can still disorganize the morning. The repaired seam on the recovered skin looks neat while the vessel is empty. You do not trust neatness. The leather must be tested under the pressure it will actually carry. Water is poured in gradually. The skin rounds, darkens, and pulls against its stitches. A thin line near the old repair changes color, but does not bead. You wait. The neck is closed and the vessel turns so the seam rests on different sides. Historical evidence from later points in Ibn Battuta's itinerary describes caravans stopping to mend and refill water skins. That tells us maintenance was expected work, not an exceptional response to disaster. It does not give a universal skin size, repair technique, or ration. Leather has a modest habit of becoming truthful only after it is filled. The seam holds, but the outer cover is worn where it will meet the saddle. You mark the vessel as usable with added protection rather than placing it among the strongest reserve skins. Condition belongs in the tally as surely as ownership. You empty enough water to make the repair safe to handle, add a folded strip beneath the worn place, and fill it again. This time the pressure spreads more evenly. The skin goes into the middle group, where it can be inspected at the next halt. Containers become misleading when they are counted without being sorted. You place sound skins in one row, recently patched skins in another, and the vessel with the poor neck beside the tools. Empty leather collapses into folds, making unlike capacities look deceptively similar. The surviving itinerary does not give you permission to announce an exact number of measures carried by every person or camel. A route through the Sahara was not served by one timeless ration. Season, stage, load, animal condition, water quality, and the reliability of the next point all mattered. You therefore record what can be known here. This group has so many containers fit for the next stage. A smaller number need watching. One cannot travel until its closure is replaced. The deeper reserve should be tied where it will not be opened casually. A merchant asks for the reassuring total. You give him 3 totals instead. Sound, patched, and not yet usable. He looks disappointed by the loss of simplicity. The water does not improve because the arithmetic is neat. You turn the poor-necked skin toward the repairer. A new thong is prepared. By the time the caravan leaves, the tally must describe vessels that can actually carry water, not merely objects that happen to be made of leather. The camels are brought to water before the heaviest loads close easy access to saddles and straps. You watch the assigned groups move toward the oasis channel in an order that allows them to return directly to their places. People and working animals share one water plan without sharing identical needs. The caravan must leave with containers filled and animals prepared for the next stages. Watering too late would force handlers to reopen loads. Watering too many at once would crowd the access used by residents and other travelers. Sigil Masa is an inhabited oasis terminus, not a starting pin on a modern map. Its palms, channels, houses, merchants, hosts and animals make departure possible. The caravan joins that life for months, then begins to separate from it through a sequence of ordinary tasks. You count the first group away from the channel. One camel has returned with the wrong handler. The animal's mark identifies the proper string, and you redirect it before its skins are assigned. The mistake is harmless because the load is still open. Once containers and freight are tied, the same confusion would travel farther. When the final assigned animal returns, you touch the wet hair at its muzzle, check the saddle pad, and call for the first filled skins. 2 containers carry marks so similar that both merchant groups claim the sounder one. You set them side by side and ask each group to describe the repair they paid for. One keeper points to stitching near the lower seam. The other identifies a replaced neck thong. Both are correct, but they are describing different skins. The vessels were crossed when the rows were moved into shade. A shared caravan does not dissolve private responsibility. Long-distance movement brought multiple owners, partners, carriers, and obligations into one line. The water containers must remain connected to the people who will maintain and account for them. The skins have achieved what containers often do. They have produced paperwork without paper. You add a second notch to one thong and shift the vessels back to their proper rows. The sounder skin belongs with the group that replaced its neck. The patched seam returns to the group that can identify the stitching. No voice needs to rise. The objects settle the matter because both adults are willing to inspect them. You update the tally and ask each keeper to repeat the new marks. The correction will matter at later halts, when a leaking skin must be recognized quickly and a sound reserve cannot be surrendered to the wrong load. For now, both containers are filled in their assigned batches. Filling begins in groups small enough to keep empty and full vessels separate. An empty skin is light, folded, and easy to misplace. A filled one changes shape, pulls at its seams, and immediately becomes a load. You bring each group to the channel, hold the mouths open, and move filled vessels into a shaded row. The water point serves the oasis community as well as the departing caravan. No one owns the entire edge merely because a long journey lies ahead. One skin is placed too close to the passage and is nearly stepped on. You move it behind the low bench. Another has been filled before its ownership thong was retied. It waits until the mark is restored. The work turns a line on a map into material preparation. Sigil Masa is one point in a chain, but the chain is not abstract. It is water gathered into leather, camels brought from the channel, marks checked, and people who know which stage comes next. Palm shade narrows as the sun rises. You shift the full row before heat builds against the wall. Every vessel is turned so the necks can be inspected without lifting the whole weight. When the batch is complete, you count by touch as well as sight. Full, marked, assigned, closed. Only then does the first row move toward the saddles. A tied neck receives its own test. You close the thong, lift the skin by its upper loops, and invert it for a moment. Water presses against the closure. One drop appears, but it comes from the wet outer surface rather than the mouth. The next skin fails, a thin run escapes beside the plug and darkens the leather below. You lower it before more is lost. A container can be sound at its seams and useless at its opening. The correction is simple because the problem has been found before loading. The old thong is removed. A fresh piece is drawn tight, then loosened and tied again, so the pressure sits evenly. You refill the small amount lost and repeat the inversion. Nothing escapes. A closed skin must survive motion, rubbing, wind, and the changing pressure of a saddle. Passing one test does not excuse later inspection, but it earns the vessel a place in the travelling count. You hang the repaired neck where air can reach it while the outer leather dries. The ownership mark remains visible. The merchant responsible for it watches the second test and agrees to the new closure. The tally receives one added mark. The skin is not simply present. It is present, assigned, filled, and usable. That is the difference between inventory and water. Before departure, you recite the next stages with the guide. He does not give you a clean line and an exact sequence of modern distances. He gives you places in working order, where a caravan expects water, where it may rest, where conditions require caution, and where another guide may be hired. A route is remembered through decisions. This water point should be reached before the reserve assigned to it is touched. That halt allows animals and people to recover. Another source may be poor or insufficient in certain conditions. A settlement means residence, access, and negotiation as well as water. The map would prefer one clean line. The water has arranged several appointments. You repeat the sequence while touching the rows that correspond to immediate use and deeper reserve. The guide corrects one order. A name you placed too early belongs after a longer interval. The change alters where one patched skin should ride, because it must remain reachable before that interval is attempted. Inherited knowledge enters the load. A place name changes a strap position. A remembered stage changes which container is opened first. You do not need to imagine the far terminus while the first decision remains unfinished. You need the next water point, the condition of the skins that must reach it, and the guide who knows how this stage connects to the following one. The caravan leaves Sigil Masa in the early morning, when shadows still stretch from animals and packs. Ibn Battuta's itinerary is summarized as movement in the early morning and late afternoon, with rest under awnings during the fiercest midday heat. That schedule belongs to this documented Western journey, and should not be mistaken for a universal rule. You walk beside the animals carrying the first stage supply. The deeper reserve is tied higher and farther from casual reach. The patched skin rides where its seam can be seen during a halt. Movement changes every earlier test. A neck that held upside down may rub against rope. A cover may creep beneath a strap. A full skin can press a saddle unevenly. You watch for darkening cloth and listen for a handler calling from the line. The mild hour is spent on distance rather than recovery. People walk steadily. Camels carry their loads without the immediate strain that harsher heat would add. Water remains closed because timing is doing part of the conservation work. No invented exact distance is needed. The useful measure is whether the planned stage, the animal pace, and the container condition still agree. The sun rises higher. You check the patched seam, find it dry, and keep the caravan moving until the awnings and the midday halt become the next task. At midday, cloth is stretched to make shade rather than comfort in any luxurious sense. The awnings reduce direct heat over people and containers while the animals rest. Full skins are placed where air can move around them and where no saddle edge continues pressing a seam. The documented itinerary gives this pause a practical place in the schedule. Travel occupies the milder hours. The fiercest heat is used for rest, inspection, and waiting. Water planning and heat planning are the same piece of work. You begin with the warmest container. Its outer cover is hot, but the neck remains tight. The patched skin shows a faint rub mark where its position shifted during the morning. You move it against softer padding before the late afternoon departure. The awning is not luxurious, but it has defeated noon on the point that matters. Someone asks whether a skin can be opened because the group is resting. You check which supply it belongs to. Immediate use, yes. Deeper reserve, no. Shade reduces avoidable strain. It does not suspend the stage plan. Camels settle nearby with loads loosened where necessary. A guide speaks quietly with two handlers about the next point. You listen while turning the patched vessel so the repaired seam rests free of pressure. The caravan is still traveling. It is simply traveling through a halt. A request for an exact daily allowance reaches you while the caravan rests. The request sounds sensible, But one number cannot be applied honestly to every person, animal, season, container, and interval. You answer by examining conditions in order. The remembered stage tells you how far the next known water should be. The skins tell you which reserve is sound. The animals and people determine how the load is divided. Heat, crowding, the condition of the next source, and recent reports about it all change what can safely be opened now. The surviving accounts preserve schedules, repairs, water points, and occasional judgments about water. They do not provide one rule that can be lifted out and treated as timeless Saharan practice. The person asking had hoped for cleaner arithmetic. You show the difference between the two rows. The nearer stage supply is accessible and already reduced by measured use. The deeper reserve remains sealed. A patched skin rides where it can be watched rather than buried. The plan is not mysterious, it is conditional. When the caravan prepares to move in late afternoon, you count what has actually been used. One vessel contains less than expected because its group is larger than the mark first suggested. You shift another sound skin into that group and change the tally. The number becomes useful only after the situation has been made specific, and the next decision remains attached to the next known water. The guide distinguishes two kinds of knowledge about the next water. One point is the planned stop, approached by a familiar sequence of ground and tracks. Another may hold water in some conditions, but is not dependable enough to replace the plan without a reason. You listen for the difference. A name on a route list is not the same as a current judgment. Water quality, capacity, access, and the condition of the approach can matter as much as the fact that a source exists. On the northern route described in 1845, a driver could refuse a water point he judged bad, even while camels drank eagerly. That is a different journey and century, so you do not transfer its exact decision here. It illustrates the broader limit of map thinking. The nearest marked water is not automatically the correct choice. The guide points toward the line the caravan will follow after the halt. He describes the next stage in relation to remembered ground, not as an empty interval. You retie the patched skin where it can be reached. The immediate use vessels go on animals nearer the middle, where several groups can access them without stopping the entire rear. The guide's memory becomes a loading decision. What he knows about the next water changes where you place leather before the caravan takes another step. Late afternoon tracks lead away from the halt in several worn lines. You watch the guide choose among them without pretending that every mark is obvious to every traveller. A hired desert guide appears explicitly later in Ibn Battuta's route at Tizarullah. Guide knowledge linked water points, stages, and practical approaches. It did not turn the Sahara into one road controlled by one people across all periods. The names and communities involved must remain tied to the routes and sources that actually support them. Here, your task is simpler. Keep the water loads balanced while the line turns. A full skin on the left of one camel rides lower than its partner. You stop the animal, lift the lower side, and move a folded pad beneath it. A guide may know the route, but the skins still insist on being carried there. The correction takes a minute. The guide has continued only far enough to hold the branch for the front. When your animal stands evenly, the line resumes. Old tracks, present judgment, and inherited instruction all meet in this turn. The route does not exist apart from the people and equipment using it. You follow the chosen branch and count the containers again by animal, making sure the stop has not exchanged one group's reserve for another's. The next water halt is known, but arrival still begins with looking. You approach slowly enough to judge the edge, the number of animals already present, and whether the ground can bear another group without becoming churned. A known stopping place can still be crowded. Its water can be sufficient, poor, slow to gather, or difficult to reach. The route keeper's confidence lies in expecting a decision, not expecting all uncertainty to vanish. You leave most animals back on firm ground and walk forward with the guide. Containers already stand near one side. Camels occupy another. The best footing is narrow, so groups must be sent in sequence. There is no survival spectacle. Nobody has discovered water by accident. The friction repeats what Seenawan revealed: limited access, working animals, and people whose needs must be ordered. You assign one group to wait while the first animals drink. A merchant wants his skins filled immediately because his load is ready. You ask him to keep the load open a little longer. Filling can happen after the animals clear the edge. The known water point becomes usable through this small refusal to crowd it. You return to the line, bring forward the first group, and keep the remaining containers folded until their turn. The camels drink in controlled groups. Each one must be counted away from the edge before the next group comes down, because animals, containers, and ownership marks have to stay connected. You watch wet muzzles lift and handlers turn the animals toward firm ground. One camel is recorded with the wrong string. The mistake is caught because its rope mark does not match the skins waiting beside its saddle. The animal has won a quiet appeal against clerical error. You move one line on the tally and return the camel to its proper group. The correction changes which containers will be loaded on it and who will inspect them at the next halt. Camel watering belongs to water management and freight management at once. A working animal that has not been watered as planned changes the next stage. An animal assigned the wrong load changes responsibility. The route depends on keeping these relationships legible. The first group is clear. The second moves forward. You remain near the tally rather than the pool, listening for each animal count as it returns. When the last assigned camel is led away, you compare the total with the marked skins. This time they agree. The water point has not created a grand event. It has produced a corrected line and an animal standing where the rest of the plan expects it. A dark patch beneath one saddle pad reveals a problem before the next stage begins. Water has seeped from a skin where the leather rubbed against a harder edge during the morning movement. You loosen the outer cover and find a small abrasion near, but not directly on, the stitched seam. The immediate task is to save the water. Another sound container is brought forward and held open. You transfer the contents carefully, stopping before grit at the bottom can enter the clean vessel. Only after the water is secure do you examine the damaged skin. The abrasion can be repaired, but not while the leather is stretched and wet. You mark it as empty and unusable for the next interval. Wind, pressure, heat and motion explain why water skin work repeats across the route. A vessel does not pass one inspection forever. Its condition changes with the saddle that carries it. The transfer alters the count. One sound skin now holds more than its group expected. The damaged vessel still exists in the inventory, but no longer carries water. You make both changes. A repairer cleans the rubbed place and sets the skin aside. The group responsible for it agrees to share the transferred water until the next maintenance halt. The problem ends as a revised tally and an empty skin laid flat, not as a crisis manufactured from a manageable leak. At Sahara, the itinerary gives maintenance an entire pause. Ibn Battuta's account says caravans halted there for 3 days to rest, mend water skins, fill them, and prepare covers. A desert guide was also hired there. You begin the halt with the damaged skin still empty and the patched vessel still under observation. Rows of leather are opened, turned, repaired, and filled. The route pauses because this work is part of movement. The 3-day halt should not be treated as a universal schedule for every oasis. It belongs to this place in this 14th century Western itinerary. Its value is specificity. Travelers expected enough time here to restore containers before the next stages. You clean the abrasion again and work a repair across the weakened area. The leather is allowed to dry before pressure returns. Another keeper replaces a neck thong. A third checks an old seam by filling only part way. The air moves across the laid-out skins. Camels rest and are prepared for later loads. The guide discusses the route ahead with adults responsible for different groups. You do not follow the discussion into a lecture. You return to the damaged skin, press the repaired place, and begin the first cautious refill. The leather darkens evenly. No line of water appears. A coarse sackcloth cover is drawn around the repaired skin. Ibn Battuta's translated account specifically mentions such covers being sewn on at Tissarola as a precaution against the wind. You leave the neck accessible and make sure the cloth does not fold into a hard ridge over the repair. The cover is not an ornament. It takes some rubbing that would otherwise reach the leather and helps protect the filled vessel through the next stage. The repair is not elegant, which is fortunate because the wind has no taste. You fill the skin gradually, pressure spreads beneath the coarse cloth. The stitched place remains dry. The cover is tied so it can be opened at a halt without removing the entire load. Nearby, other containers receive their own covers. No claim is made that every Saharan traveller used the same material or method. This is a documented practice at a named stop in a particular itinerary. The covered skin returns to its assigned animal. You place soft padding between it and the saddle, then step back while the camel rises. The vessel settles without pressing the repair against a hard edge. One adult watches the seam while another checks the animal's stance. When both are satisfied, you add the skin to the usable count. The root has been repaired in leather before it resumes on the ground. The repaired skin creates a final disagreement. You want it among the nearer stage supply, where it can be reached and inspected. Another keeper argues that its new cover makes it sound enough for the deeper reserve. Both positions have a reason. Neither requires a raised voice. You loosen the cover together and inspect the seam under full pressure. The repair holds, but the abrasion remains recent. Its useful status is not the same as an older, proven skin. Repeated repair and filling are documented at this halt. The surviving account does not preserve this exact internal allocation, so the decision remains carefully bounded. You place the repaired skin with the nearer stage group. The keeper who preferred the reserve accepts the choice after seeing where the saddle edge will meet it. The deeper reserve receives a sounder vessel from another row. The dispute has improved the arrangement. Two people examined the same object instead of defending separate memories. You change one tally mark. The repaired vessel is full, covered, assigned, and accessible. Another mark moves with the sounder skin into the reserve line. No survival crisis is needed to close the waterwork. A small disagreement ends with leather opened, pressure tested, and a mark moved. The next stage becomes clearer because the count now describes the containers as they actually are. You retally the rows one final time. Sound reserve, nearer stage supply, patched and watched, empty for later repair. Ownership marks are repeated aloud. Animals are matched to the vessels tied beside their saddles. The route now appears in the arrangement. Sigil Masa gave the caravan time, animals, hosts, and water for departure. Early morning and late afternoon movement joined heat management to container use. Midday awnings protected people and supplies. Known water points required cues and judgment. Tesarala gave repair, filling, covers, rest, and a guide for what followed. A modern map line hides all of that work. The historical route was a chain of decisions maintained by wells, springs, oasis communities, inherited knowledge, animals, leather, rope, and people willing to count again. You press the newly covered skin, it remains dry. The doubtful neck closure still holds. The animal corrected at the earlier water point stands with the proper group. One mark moves half a space, because a keeper notices the last tally has placed a sound skin in the wrong column. You correct it without ceremony. The waterwork ends on a count that agrees with the visible loads. Beyond the rows, pale slabs at Tagaza wait to turn the same ropes, animals and arithmetic, toward a heavier problem. The bridge from water to salt is not a leap from one famous commodity to another. It is a change in what the same working system must carry. The covered water skins remain part of the loads. The guide stage knowledge still matters. Camels still have to be watered, rested, and kept at a pace their freight permits. At Tagaza, however, rigid salt slabs add a different kind of pressure. They cannot be folded, poured, or shifted in small amounts. You watch one loaded animal move away from the repair rows. The covered skin rides against soft padding. Its ownership mark remains visible. The tally is folded and given to the adult responsible for the group. Farther ahead, salt pieces will be received, paired, wrapped and balanced. A camel in Ibn Battuta's account could carry 2 slabs, a statement that sounds simple until 2 unequal pieces must hang from one saddle. For now, the waterwork is complete enough to release your attention. The repaired skin has a place. The reserve has a count. The disagreement has ended in a check rather than a grievance. The caravan moves toward the next material question. Leather yields slightly beneath rope. Salt will not. At Tagaza, the familiar account of Saharan salt begins as 2 awkward objects lying on folded padding. You crouch beside the slabs and compare their thickness before either reaches a saddle. Ibn Battuta's western itinerary reached Tagaza after 25 days from Sijil Masa. His account describes large salt slabs loaded for the journey onward. The surviving detail gives a firm boundary. It does not tell us every gesture in the loading yard, or the complete organization of the workings. The ordinary goal is to receive transportable slabs, pair them, secure them, and bring the camels away with loads that can survive the first stage. The friction is physical, salt is rigid, edges are uneven. Rope must hold without cutting. A pair that looks level on the ground may settle differently when the animal stands. The adult organizer turns the heavier edge of one slab inward. Another worker slides padding beneath a corner. The 2 pieces are brought close enough for comparison without pretending they are identical. Salt is heavy before it is valuable, and the order of those facts governs the yard. The organizer signals for the first camel to remain kneeling. 1 slab is lifted toward each side. The arithmetic has begun, but gravity has not yet agreed to it. Ibn Battuta's account says a camel could carry 2 salt slabs. The sentence is memorable because it is compact. The work is difficult because the slabs are not. 1 piece is thicker at the lower edge. The other is longer and slightly narrower. Set 1 on each side, and the same number of slabs produces unequal weight and a different pull on the saddle. 2 slabs make a pair only after arithmetic has met gravity. The organizer steps back, lowers his head to the line of the load, and asks for extra padding beneath the lighter side. The correction raises the edge, but height is not the whole problem. The heavier slab still pulls farther from the animal. He loosens the first rope and shifts both pieces closer to the saddle. Another adult steadies the opposite side. The camel remains kneeling, patient only in the sense that it has not yet stood up and demonstrated what everyone has missed. The pair now hangs more evenly. The organizer presses the front and rear ties in turn. Neither side should swing freely, and neither should be forced against a brittle corner. He does not mark the load complete. The animal must rise before the calculation can be trusted. A number has been satisfied. Balance is still waiting. The work stays at the receiving edge, where cut slabs are selected and prepared for transport. Ibn Battuta establishes salt extraction at Tagaza, but his brief account does not support an invented tour through every task, tool or worker. That limit keeps the camera with visible, practical actions. A finished slab is inspected, a cracked one is set aside, pairs are compared. Cloth or other low-stakes padding is used cautiously in the staging without being announced as a universal local custom. Rope is tightened. Camels rise and answer the calculation through their stance. The organizer receives another slab and runs a hand along its edge. Salt dust stays on his palm. One corner has broken cleanly, but does not threaten the main piece. A longer fissure near the center would be different. He taps lightly beside the line and listens to the dull response. The crack continues farther than it first appeared. That slab should not be trusted as one half of a long stage pair. It is moved away from the counted row rather than tied on and admired from a distance. The rejected piece may have another use, but it will not enter this load. The organizer chooses a sounder slab of similar thickness. The answer advances through selection, not through claims that surviving evidence cannot carry. The narrow crack can widen under repeated jolting, pressure, and changes of support. The organizer therefore examines the next slab before value has a chance to distract from condition. He follows the pale surface with his fingertips. One edge is rough but sound. The opposite face bears shallow marks from cutting or handling. Nothing suggests a break deep enough to divide the piece during the first stages. Rigid freight is valuable only while it remains transportable. A cracked slab that opens under rope could shift an entire saddle, force an unloading, or damage the piece beside it. Rejecting it now is part of animal care as well as commodity care. The chosen slab is laid beside its proposed mate. Their lengths differ, but the weight appears closer. The organizer asks two adults to lift each piece in turn, not to produce a precise measure, but to compare what their bodies already report. The second pair feels more balanced. It still needs padding at one corner and a slightly different rope position. A famous trade can be reduced to the word salt. The loading yard cannot. It must distinguish sound from doubtful, heavy from heavier, and a workable mismatch from one that will travel badly. The organizer marks both pieces for the same animal and moves them to the loading row. Sharp corners threaten the rope before the caravan has moved a step. The organizer folds padding around the worst edges so the lashing bears against cloth rather than directly against salt. The exact material and pattern of wrapping are not preserved in the account. The staging remains modest, ordinary protection placed where a rigid corner would otherwise grind against rope or saddle. Nothing more is claimed. One worker holds the fold while another passes the line beneath the slab. The first pull seats the cloth. The second begins to draw the piece toward the saddle. The organizer stops them before the rope becomes tight enough to bite through the padding. He checks the opposite side. Its corner sits differently, so the same fold would create a ridge. The cloth is opened, doubled once, and laid flatter. Rope work repeats, but repetition is not sameness. Each slab changes the place where pressure gathers. The organizer pulls again, waits, and pulls a final time. The wrapped edges hold. Enough rope remains accessible for correction after the camel stands, and again at the first halt. The load is not beautiful, it is legible. Anyone walking beside it can see where the line passes, where the padding sits, and which knot must be released if the pair settles unevenly. The camel remains kneeling while one adult steadies each side. The first slab is raised against the saddle. The second follows before the weight can pull the frame too far in one direction. Working camels are the transport system here, not picturesque additions around a commodity. Their bodies determine how high the slabs sit, how the rope crosses, how much movement the load can tolerate, and when the whole arrangement must be rebuilt. The organizer watches the animal's neck and forelegs. A camel may turn toward the pressure, shift a foot, or resist rising when a load is poorly placed. Such responses are immediate evidence. Both slabs are now tied. The organizer checks clearance near the legs and the line across the back. One side sits a little forward. He loosens it and draws the piece back until the pair occupies a more equal position. Only then does he give the signal. The camel starts to rise. Its rear lifts first, changing the angle of both slabs. The workers keep their hands near the load without trying to hold the entire weight themselves. For a moment, the pair looks worse. Then the front legs straighten. The saddle settles into its working position. The organizer steps back to see what the standing animal has made of the arithmetic. A load that appeared level while the camel knelt now leans backward on the right. The animal's rise has moved padding, tightened one line, and left another with more slack than expected. The organizer asks the camel to stand still. He shortens the rear tie on the right and loosens the front just enough to allow the slab to return. A second adult presses the piece inward while the rope is drawn. The correction is small, but it changes how the weight will move at every step. A rigid slab hanging too far back can swing, grind against padding, and make the animal compensate. The camel turns its head toward the saddle. The organizer watches the posture rather than interpreting the look as personality. The forefeet are even. The back no longer pulls visibly to one side. He walks around the animal. From the front, the slab edges sit closer to level. From behind, the pair has stopped leaning. The rope remains reachable. The first rise has completed a test the ground could not provide. Loading is not finished when the last knot is tied. It is finished provisionally when the standing animal and the visible freight agree well enough to move. The organizer places this camel beside the counted row, but keeps its recently adjusted side facing the path, where it can be watched. The tally records animals, pairs, and rejected pieces. It does not begin with one splendid caravan total. Caravan scale varied sharply across routes, seasons, merchants, security conditions, and available water. Large formations are documented, but one loading yard should not be inflated into a superlative. The useful number here is the one that can be checked against a visible animal and its two slabs. The organizer makes one mark for the camel, another notation for the paired pieces, and a separate sign beside the slab rejected for its crack. Ownership marks are confirmed before similar pale freight merges into longer rows. Counting pairs rather than slogans produces stubborn arithmetic. 2 slabs belong to this animal, 2 others are waiting. 1 rejected piece remains outside the travelling total. 1 camel has risen, but needs a first halt inspection. The organizer walks to the row and touches each load as its mark is read aloud. Written or scratched accounting, spoken confirmation, and visible freight reinforce one another. He reaches the recently adjusted camel. The pair remains level while the animal stands. The tally can now include it among loads ready to depart, though the note for inspection stays. The next line is not started until the first line agrees with the yard. 4 slabs wait in 2 proposed pairs, and neither pair balances well. One contains the heaviest and lightest pieces. The other is closer, but both slabs pull forward because their shapes are similar in the wrong way. The organizer does not solve each camel separately. He compares all 4 pieces and exchanges 1 slab between the pairs. The new arrangement is better immediately. Each camel receives 1 heavier and 1 lighter piece, whose shapes oppose rather than repeat the same pull. Padding can correct the remaining difference. Balancing rigid freight sometimes requires arithmetic across several animals. More rope on one side cannot fix every mismatch. A small exchange can do what a tighter knot cannot. Both camels remain kneeling while the pairs are rebuilt. The organizer checks ownership marks before the slabs cross, making sure the exchange changes the pairing without confusing the consignments. The marks remain visible after wrapping. When the animals rise, one pair settles evenly. The other needs a narrow pad beneath the rear corner. That correction is made, and the second animal stands more squarely. 2 imperfect pairs have become 2 workable ones. The organizer reties both rather than pretending one solution has served 2 loads. He updates the tally and steps back far enough to see the 4 pale edges aligned in a quieter relation. The same knot appears on several loads, but its tension changes with every edge, pad, and saddle. The organizer repeats the method without assuming the result. On the next camel, a rope lies too close to a bare salt corner. He opens the line, shifts the padding, and draws the knot farther toward the middle. On another, the cloth has folded into a hard ridge. It is flattened before the rope is tightened again. The evidence does not support one universal loading pattern for every caravan or salt source. The practical necessity is less controversial. Rigid freight must be secured in a way that can survive movement and still be adjusted when it settles. The organizer tests each tie with pressure from different angles. A knot that holds a direct pull may still allow the slab to swing backward. A line drawn hard enough to stop all movement may cut its own padding. He leaves the final turns accessible. The first short halt is already part of the loading plan, because the animal's steps will reveal pressures that the yard cannot. Rope memory lies in hands, but it stays attentive to the object. Repetition becomes skill only when it notices difference. The organizer finishes the tie, asks the camel to rise, and watches the wrapped corner. The line holds without biting deeper. He marks the load for another check after motion. One camel shifts a forefoot and turns its head toward the saddle as soon as the pair settles. The organizer does not dismiss the movement because the tally is complete. He checks the front line and finds it pulling the right slab inward at an angle. The load is technically secure and practically uncomfortable. A narrow pad is added beneath the pressure point, and the rope is retied with a flatter path. The camel's posture is part of the calculation. It reports what cannot be learnt from counting slabs alone. After the correction, the animal places its forefoot more evenly. The organizer walks it several steps, stops, and watches the pair. The slabs move with the saddle rather than against it. This is why working animals must remain the center of freight decisions. A commodity does not cross the Sahara by being valuable. It crosses because an animal can carry a balanced load through repeated stages, with handlers willing to stop when posture, rope, or motion says the arrangement is wrong. The organizer returns the camel to the ready string. He does not interpret the animal's response beyond what can be seen. The stance is improved. The load is steadier. That is enough. One tally mark remains beside the animal, but the note for immediate correction is removed. The camel has answered more usefully than the paper could. Salt slabs standing in rows look increasingly alike, which makes ownership marks more important as loading proceeds. The organizer asks each merchant's representative to identify the pieces before they disappear into the moving strings. One slab has been placed beneath the wrong mark. Its size would fit the proposed pair, and the error could easily survive until a distant market. The organizer stops the loading and returns it to the proper consignment. Long-distance trade joined owners, carriers, partnerships, and obligations. Similar freight did not become communal merely because it traveled in one caravan. A correct load must agree with the account as well as the animal. The misplaced slab is exchanged for the right one. The replacement is slightly thinner, so the padding is rebuilt. A convenient error has become a little more work. No one enjoys reopening a balanced pair. The organizer does it anyway. A distant dispute would cost more time and trust than a retied rope at Tagaza. When the correct slabs are in place, both marks remain visible near the upper edges. The camel rises, and the pair hangs evenly enough. The organizer reads the tally aloud. Animal, 2 pieces, owner mark, carrier. Each term points to something present in the yard. Only when all 4 agree does he send the load into the departure line. The first salt string moves away from Tagaza at the pace set by rigid freight and working animals. The organizer walks beside the camel whose rear tie was corrected after rising. Tagaza is not an isolated marvel in empty sand. Ibn Battuta reached it within a longer western itinerary that connected Sijil Masa, water and rest points, guides, markets, and further travel. The salt loads enter that chain. Their movement depends on the same skins, animals, halts, and route knowledge prepared earlier. The pale slabs hold the remaining light longer than the ground. Bells begin at measured intervals. The organizer watches for swinging rather than admiring the view. One load settles lower after several minutes. The change is not yet dangerous, but it confirms why the first halt was planned as part of loading. He marks the animal by position and tells the handler to keep the affected side visible. The caravan does not increase pace. An ordinary beginning is the desired result. Camels find their stride. The ropes take working pressure. Padding compresses. Salt has left the receiving edge and become freight in motion. That change is the test. The organizer follows close enough to touch the rear line if it loosens, and far enough to see whether the pair stays level against the horizon. The first short stage carries the yard's arithmetic into the route. At the first settling halt, the organizer goes directly to the load already marked for attention. The right slab has shifted backward by roughly the width of his hand. No exact measurement needs to become a rule. The visible change is enough. Padding has compressed, and the rear tie now carries less tension than it did in the yard. The camel kneels. The organizer supports the slab while another adult releases the line. The piece is drawn forward, the pad folded more securely, and the rear rope shortened. Repeated inspection is the sensible consequence of carrying hard, uneven freight over irregular ground. A load is not secured forever by the first knot. Motion completes the test, and often demands another answer. While everyone is stopped, the organizer checks neighboring animals. One knot has remained firm. Another pad has crept, but not enough to alter balance. It is corrected anyway. The work is stubbornly repetitive, and therefore easy to neglect. The organizer prevents repetition from becoming carelessness by treating each load as a new report. The camels rise again. The marked pair settles closer to level. A short walk within the halt shows no renewed swing. The caravan can resume. The first correction has not interrupted the journey. It has fulfilled the plan made before departure. The salt can be followed southward only as far as surviving evidence allows. It does not pretend that this composite pair can be traced to one named buyer or one final market. Northwestern's Caravans of Gold project documents Saharan salt slabs moving by camel toward entrepôts near the Niger River and, from there, sometimes continuing by boat. That broader route gives the load a destination in principle, not a fictional receipt. The organizer's immediate world remains rope and animal. He checks the pair at the next halt, finds it sound, and updates the tally. Farther along, another carrier, broker, or boatman may take responsibility. The commodity can change transport without losing the marks and obligations attached to it. This is how a desert source connects to riverside exchange. Not through one unbroken heroic crossing, but through stages, transfers, and adults who receive what others have kept intact. The slabs remain large units for camel transport. Their later market use may require a different scale. For now, the organizer's success is that both pieces have arrived at the transfer point without opening their crack, cutting their rope, or pulling the camel unevenly. He touches the two upper edges, hears the account read, and releases the load to the next responsible hands. In the Western Sudan, Ibn Battuta reported salt being cut into smaller pieces and used in transactions. The large slab that traveled as freight could therefore become a set of more manageable units farther along the network. The change in scale matters. At Tagaza, the organizer needed two rigid pieces balanced across a camel. At a market, the useful question could become how the salt was divided, measured, carried by people, or exchanged. The famous claim that salt had value does not explain either task. Value did not wrap the corner, choose the pair, water the camel, or retighten the rear line. It motivated the movement. Human and animal work made the movement possible. The organizer watches a sound slab placed near pieces already cut smaller. He does not follow the entire transaction. His account concerns the freight delivered and the condition in which it arrived. The paired load has survived the stage. Its rope can be removed without revealing a deep crack beneath the pressure points. The camel stands free of the rigid weight and shifts comfortably. A commodity often reduced to a slogan has changed shape through several kinds of labor. The organizer records the delivery mark and closes the line beside that animal. Salt can now become smaller arithmetic. His stubborn larger arithmetic is complete. The organizer reviews the work in the terms that actually governed it. 2 slabs, but not any 2. 1 camel, but not a neutral platform. Several ropes, each placed against an edge. Padding that compressed. Marks that preserved ownership. A first rise that changed the balance. A halt that exposed slack. The arithmetic is stubborn because every number has a physical condition attached to it. 2 cracked slabs are not equal to 2 sound ones. 2 equal-looking pieces may not weigh alike. One animal may carry a pair comfortably after a pad is moved and poorly before it. No picturesque scale is needed. One load that remains level explains more than a superlative. The organizer listens as the final pair settles at a halt. No rope creaks sharply. The camel's stance is even. Both marks agree with the tally. He adds the last line only after touching the front and rear lashings. The account now describes visible freight rather than intention. Gold and salt will later appear in broad explanations of trans-Saharan exchange. Here, the practical answer rests on the material truth beneath that phrase. Repeated comparison, animal handling, and adults willing to redo a correct-looking knot. The organizer folds the tally and leaves the pair ready for the next measured stage. One rope gives a short dry creak after the tally has been folded. The organizer opens it again. The sound comes from a wrapped corner where the line has tightened against compressed cloth. The slab has not shifted, but the rope will be easier to preserve if the pressure is spread now. He loosens one turn, adds a narrow fold beneath the contact point, and reties the line. The correction is small enough to fit beside an ordinary account and important enough not to ignore. Freight naturally becomes obligation. Someone owns the salt, someone receives it, someone supplies the camel. Someone walks beside the load, someone records whether the correct pieces arrived. The material and legal sides of the network meet at the same knot. The organizer asks the handler to move the camel several steps. The creak does not return. The pair remains level. He places the folded tally with the adult responsible for the next interval. The salt question has been answered. A commodity crossed the desert through stubborn arithmetic, secure padding, repeated halts, and care for working animals. Farther north, another adult will face a different kind of balance. Goods, partners, messages, obligations, and a route that has changed across centuries. Ink waits beside rope. Near a shaded passage in 19th century Gadams, a clerk places a folded account beside a packed load and holds the page down with an inkstone. The bundle is already roped. Its owner is not yet satisfied. Its carrier has brought a different figure, and the gate will not remain busy forever. He begins with the visible things: one roll of cloth, two smaller parcels, a leather bag whose contents are named on the page but not opened in the dust. Beside them lies a spare length of rope, ready for whichever disagreement becomes physical first. Gadames is not simply a mark at the edge of a modern map. The old town grew around the spring called Ain el Faros, and its managed water, covered passages, houses, gardens and palms made settled life possible at a meeting place of routes. Caravans arrived here from different directions and departed toward different markets. The clerk's work belongs to that movement, though no surviving page can make him representative of every transaction. He reads one name, touches one knot, and listens to news passing inward from the gate. A caravan has arrived later than expected. Another has changed its intended road. Prices mentioned yesterday may already be less useful than the condition of a well farther south. His ordinary goal is smaller than the network historians will later describe. Before the load moves, he must match the people who supplied it, the person carrying it, the obligations written beside it, and the road now considered practical. He starts with one bundle because a network becomes visible through particular promises. Water runs through the life of Gardamus before it enters the clerk's account. The spring feeds an oasis settlement whose buildings and gardens have long been arranged around the need to use shade and water carefully. Outside the page, a jar is carried past. Farther away, palms stand above the town. The clerk hears footsteps in the passage and turns the account so that the next line catches more light. He does not record the spring as a marvel. It is part of the working ground beneath the transaction. A caravan terminus needs more than an open patch where camels may stop. It needs water, storage, people who know arriving merchants, places to negotiate, and routes into local life. Gadames became an important hub because movement across the desert met a settled community able to receive and redirect it. The line on his page concerns a payment due after arrival. That phrase, after arrival, contains several other tasks. Animals must be unloaded, containers must be inspected, news from the road must be compared, goods may pass to another carrier, another owner, or another market. A load that has crossed one section of desert is not necessarily at the end of its journey. He draws a short mark beside the bundle and waits while two men compare the count. The spring continues beyond the shaded wall, indifferent to the century being assigned to it. The account, however, belongs to a particular late period in a much older history. To understand what the clerk has inherited, the account must widen carefully, then return to his hand before the ink dries. More than 1,000 years before this page, regular annual camel caravans expanded across parts of the Sahara from about the 8th century. That development did not create one road running forever between two fixed ends. It strengthened a changing set of routes, stages, markets, and settlements whose importance rose or fell with security, political power, demand, and access to producing regions. In the Western network, Sijil Massa became a major northern terminus. Caravans could gather there before moving south, and goods arriving from across the desert could be redirected toward Mediterranean markets. The town's importance belonged to a particular geography of exchange, not to ownership of every route beyond it. The clerk in Gadames knows none of this as a neat historical beginning. He knows that some roads are old, some agreements inherited, and some partners connected through people he may never meet. He also knows that a respected road can become inconvenient. News of insecurity, poor water, changed demand, or a stronger market may pull movement elsewhere. He lifts the page and checks a second notation. The bundle before him is assigned to one route, but the margin names a partner linked to another. That is not a contradiction. A caravan network works through transfers. A merchant need not accompany every object through every stage, and no single caravan has to travel from one outer edge of the system to the other. The 8th century expansion matters because it helps explain the scale and regularity later visible in medieval exchange. It does not authorize the clerk to treat 11 centuries as one season. He lowers the page again and returns to the present load. Sijil Massa's rise also shows why a terminus is not permanent merely because it once became important. Routes gathered around places where water, markets, political authority, and access to other roads aligned. When those conditions changed, traffic could change with them. The medieval states of Ghana, Mali, and later Songhai were deeply connected to trans-Saharan exchange, but none was identical with the whole network. Political power could protect routes, tax goods, encourage markets, or redirect commercial attention. It could not turn the Sahara into a single state road. North of the desert, different dynasties and cities also shaped connections without owning every movement between them. At the Gadames gate, the clerk receives a brief correction. The arriving carrier has not brought the expected partner's load. That load followed another group after a delay. The bundle in front of him belongs to a related account whose mark resembles the first. The clerk separates the pages. This small confusion gives the larger history its proper scale. Networks overlap. Names recur. Partners use agents. A place may be central to one route and peripheral to another. A caravan recorded under a ruler's reign may depend more immediately on a local guide, an oasis host, a creditor, a packer, and a sequence of water points. He places the mistaken page beneath the inkstone and keeps the correct one in his hand. The road named there is not timeless. It is useful now because people still know its stages and because the receiving market remains worth reaching. Should either condition change, the line of movement may bend long before a map is redrawn. The goods named in accounts and surviving objects make the connections visible, but they must not be piled together as though every caravan carried the same cargo. Gold moved north from producing regions through West African and Saharan exchange. Salt moved south from desert sources. Cloth, copper, ivory, glass vessels, and glass beads appear in different parts of the wider record. Each belong to particular routes, periods, values, and chains of transfer. The clerk does not need the entire inventory of trans-Saharan history. He needs the contents of the bundle beside him. One parcel is cloth. Another is closed and marked for a partner. The account describes an obligation rather than a museum label. What matters is who supplied the goods, who accepted responsibility, and what return is expected. An object may travel farther than the person presently holding it. Glass made beyond the Sahara could reach communities south of the desert through exchange. Gold leaving West Africa could pass through several hands before entering Mediterranean circulation. Salt might be carried by camel to an entrepot near the Niger River, then divided or transferred again. Movement happened in stages. He presses a thumb beside the written count. The carrier repeats the number. A witness standing near the passage confirms the mark on the wrapping. No one present claims to see the whole network. They see a load, a contract, and the next accountable transfer. That is enough to connect distant economies without pretending that distance disappears. The desert remains a region of wells, towns, workers, animals, settlements, and remembered routes. The bundle moves because many local acts have been made to agree. A folded letter weighs almost nothing besides salt or cloth, yet it can alter the movement of both. 19th century caravan organization was supported by partnerships, contracts, private records, and legal practices. Written agreements helped merchants coordinate resources and responsibility across distance, often within a literate commercial world shaped by Islamic law. The clerk opens the smaller page that arrived with the carrier. Its message changes one part of the account. A partner will accept the goods at a different stage. Payment is to be divided according to an earlier agreement. The load itself does not move while he reads, but its commercial direction has shifted. Paper also carried more than instructions. Across centuries, routes linked people who exchanged religious learning, legal habits, techniques, stories, and ideas along with material goods. Such movement did not produce one uniform culture on either side of the Sahara. It created contacts whose effects depended on the people and places receiving them. He folds the message along its existing crease. The page is useful because others recognize the names, marks, and obligations it contains. Its authority is social as well as written. A contract cannot water an animal, find a well, or tighten a rope. It can tell partners who bears the cost when those tasks have been arranged and something changes. The clerk places the letter beneath the main account. Beside it, the packed bundle remains exactly where it was, but the next person responsible for it is now clearer. A light object has reorganized a heavy one. He calls for the carrier and points to the corrected line. The broad accounting includes goods, messages, ideas, and people moving through linked routes. Enslaved people were also carried north across the Sahara within these trade networks. The clerk bends over the account again. The carrier has heard the corrected destination and now wants the payment term read once more. The clerk traces the line with one finger and gives the amount as the page records it. A witness listens. The bundle is not opened, and its rope remains taut. The carrier repeats the name of the receiving partner. The clerk checks it against the folded letter. One mark is faint where the page has rubbed at its crease, so he turns it toward the light and compares the remaining strokes. The two names agree. A small written sign would settle the identification completely, but the carrier has brought only the letter. Another adult is sent toward a nearby house to find the person who can confirm it. Until then, the load stays beside the passage. The clerk places the letter under the main page so the wind cannot lift either one. He checks the outer wrapping without loosening it and notes where the owner's mark has been tied near the rope. When the confirming partner arrives, page, mark, and spoken account must all describe the same obligation. Water continues through the oasis town. Footsteps pass the gate. The account remains unfinished by one ordinary line, and the clerk waits with the paper weighted against the air. Across the medieval centuries, the prominence of different states changed the conditions around exchange. Ghana, Mali, and Songhai each belonged to distinct periods and political arrangements. Their rulers could draw revenue from trade, support important towns, and affect the security or direction of routes. Moroccan power later entered parts of this history as well. None of these changes made the network a single institution with an unbroken office and one set of rules. The clerk at Gadames deals with a partnership from his own century. Its procedures cannot simply be projected backward. Earlier merchants also depended on trust, credit, agents, and information, but the exact form of a 19th century paper agreement belongs to its documentary setting. The confirming partner arrives and reads the disputed line. He recognizes the letter, then points to a second name that the clerk had taken for a place. It is the name of another participant. The correction changes the share assigned after sale. The clerk scrapes no grand theory from this. He makes a smaller mark beside the first and asks both men to hear the revised reading. The load may now pass without carrying an avoidable disagreement into the next stage. This is how political history and ordinary organization meet without becoming identical. A ruler may shape the safety and taxation of a route. A merchant still needs a carrier. A town may prosper as a terminus. A clerk still needs the correct name on the correct line. The large structure matters through consequences that arrive in small, accountable forms. He folds the page once, leaving the final space open for acknowledgement. Toward the end of the 15th century, growing Atlantic coast trade drew some exchange away from older Saharan intermediaries. It altered commercial directions and helped new centers grow, yet it did not bring trans-Saharan trade to a sudden end. Some routes slowed, others adjusted, and movement across the desert continued. The distinction matters beside the 19th century bundle. If the Atlantic had simply erased the caravan network, the clerk's work would have no place here. Instead, the record shows continuity through change. Gadames remained linked to an important central route, while other termini and roads followed their own fortunes. He hears that one expected group will not arrive by the road first named. The reason passed through several voices and is not written down. He therefore records only the practical result. The partner will wait. A different carrier may take the goods onward. The account will remain open until the transfer is settled. A changed route is not necessarily a collapsed network. It may mean that people have chosen another sequence of wells, another market, another political boundary, or another set of partners. Sometimes the shift is temporary. Sometimes it becomes part of a larger reorientation, visible only later. The clerk draws a line beneath the uncertain instruction, rather than converting rumor into fact. The bundle stays near the gate. Its next movement depends on information still arriving. Beyond the passage, the town continues its ordinary work around water and shade. The network is not suspended in a heroic desert crossing. It is waiting for a reliable person to say which road now makes sense. The 19th century records, studied by historians, reveal a commercial world that required capital, practical skill, partnership, and legal understanding. A caravan had to be assembled from more than animals and goods. Investors, merchants, carriers, guides, hosts, and agents could hold different parts of the responsibility. Agreements distributed risk and expected profit, though the surviving documents never show every voice involved. The clerk's corrected page names two shares. One belongs to the supplier of the goods, another belongs to the participant who organized part of the movement. The carrier's payment follows a separate understanding. The page does not reduce their work to one owner and one servant. It records a set of linked obligations. He checks the bundle's mark against the letter again. The shapes agree. The confirming partner presses his finger beside the line. The witness watches the clerk add the final notation. The paper economy is not separate from the camel road. It reaches into the rope. A badly packed load can create a loss named in an account. A delayed arrival can change a payment date. A route closed by insecurity can force partners to renegotiate. Law and literacy give those disagreements forms that may travel even when the people involved are far apart. The clerk sands or dries the fresh ink according to the materials at hand, then keeps the page flat. The exact gesture is not preserved, so the important action remains simpler. He waits until the mark will not smear. The load is now legally clearer than it was when it arrived. It is not yet physically ready to leave. Route knowledge enters the account as news. A road may be remembered for generations, yet each departure still belongs to present conditions. Wells can be poor. Stages can be judged differently. Political authority can change, and markets can draw traffic toward another terminus. Continuity therefore depends on repeated adjustment, not on refusing to change. The clerk asks the carrier what he heard at the last stopping place. The answer is cautious. One group used the usual road, another delayed. The report does not support a firm conclusion about the whole route. He writes no precise statement. Instead, he leaves the onward instruction conditional on a guide's arrival. This gives the packed load a temporary stillness. The goods are counted, the partners identified, and the obligations corrected, but the next road has not yet been chosen. Earlier centuries offer the same warning at a larger scale. Sigil Masa could become a major terminus, and later lose part of that prominence. West African political centers could redirect trade without controlling every caravan. Atlantic exchange could slow some Saharan patterns without ending all of them. 19th century gardens could remain active, while other routes experienced different pressures. The clerk sees only the present edge of those changes. A guide will come with knowledge of water points, security, weather, and recent movement. The account will then name the person responsible for the next stage. He sets the pen down. The rope beside the bundle is still loose at one corner, so he moves from information to the practical thing that can already be corrected. No single community name can stand for everyone who made Saharan movement possible. Different regions and centuries involve different settled populations, pastoral groups, merchants, guides, miners, carriers, rulers, scholars, craftspeople, hosts and workers. The sources identify some of them closely and leave others obscure. Precision sometimes means declining to supply a label that the evidence does not give. The clerk knows the people before him by their names and obligations, not as examples of a generic desert type. One has brought the letter, one confirms the partnership, one will help retie the load. The guide expected later will carry knowledge attached to a route and recent conditions. He lifts the loose rope and finds that it has not failed. The bundle was tied before the corrected contents were placed beside it, and the final turn was never drawn tight. He asks the carrier to hold the opposite side. Together they settle the wrapping, pull the rope across the load, and make the tension even. The movement resembles the work already seen at the salt source, though this bundle is lighter and belongs to another route and century. Similar practical actions do not erase historical difference. They reveal how often long-distance exchange depends on hands completing ordinary tasks. The clerk watches the knot. His responsibility is the written account, but a page that names a sound load should not be closed over a visibly loose one. Once the rope lies correctly, he returns to the inkstone. The guide has not yet arrived. The load can wait without becoming anonymous. An adult messenger from the passage calls that another bundle has been found beneath the wrong awning. The clerk does not send the account away. He walks far enough to see the mark, then returns with the carrier. The second bundle belongs to the first page, the one placed beneath the inkstone after the confusion at the gate. Its rope carries the expected sign. The delay has not altered the network. It has merely put two related loads in neighboring places and allowed their records to arrive in the opposite order. The clerk lays both pages side by side. He reads the names again, matches each mark, and assigns each carrier to the correct account. The work is slow because similarity is not identity. A letter, a place, and a partner can each be misread when the person doing the reading assumes the answer too soon. The two bundles now show the structure more clearly than a long catalogue of commodities. They came through different hands. They will not necessarily leave together. Their owners' interests overlap through partnership, but their routes may divide. Gadames is a point of transfer, not a funnel that turns every movement into one stream. He closes the first account only after the owner of the newly found bundle confirms the count. The second remains open for the guide's route advice. One error has been reduced to an ordinary explanation. The goods were not lost, the page was not false, the awning was wrong, and the clerk had waited long enough to discover it. At the gate, The guide finally arrives with dust on his clothing and recent information in his memory. He does not announce a permanent road. He describes the next workable stage and the conditions reported beyond it. The clerk listens for the parts that change responsibility, which carrier will go, where the transfer is expected, and when the next message may be sent. The 19th century network reaches backward only through careful comparison. Its contracts show continued caravan organization, but they do not prove that 8th century merchants used the same forms. Gadames remains important on a central route, but it does not replace sigil masa in the history of Western exchange. Salt, gold, cloth, glass, paper, and other goods connect distant economies, but not every item travels together. The clerk writes the guide's name beside the open account. He adds the agreed stage, then reads the line aloud to the partners. The page can now travel with a copy or remain with the person responsible. According to the arrangement, the sources do not let us reconstruct in detail. What matters is that the obligation has been made specific. He closes the account. The network has endured from the 8th through the 19th century, not by remaining one road, one state, or one institution, but by changing routes, partners, markets, and termini, while people continue to solve the next practical problem. Beside the gate, the corrected rope is tightened once more. The guide touches the bundle, and the carrier prepares to move it toward the waiting animals. The bundle leaves the shade at walking pace. No century of trade departs with it as a single procession. One carrier guides this load. One clerk keeps its account. One guide holds the route news. Beyond them stand the spring, the gate, the settled town, and the next chain of water and remembered ground. The clerk remains beside the second page until the carrier has passed. He checks that the correct bundle has gone with the correct people. Then he places the completed account beneath the other papers. Across the wider history, gold moved north, salt moved south, and cloth, glassware, paper, and many other things passed through changing connections. Ideas and practices traveled with people. The movement depended on communities and workers who cannot be compressed into one caravan culture. It also depended on decisions as modest as waiting for a witness, correcting a name, choosing a road, and tightening a rope. The 1845 night guide and this terminus clerk never shared one timeless route. Their tasks belong to different places and periods, yet both reveal the same limit on grand descriptions. A network exists only while particular people can bring a particular load through the next stage. The clerk lifts the inkstone from the first page. Water continues through Gardames. Near the gate, a camel bell sounds once as the departing load settles into line. The account is closed, the rope holds, and the road beyond the town has become an ordinary task again. The first stars remain above the cooling ground. A coiled rope lies where careful hands left it, and the dark line of the caravan keeps its measured shape. One camel bell sounds, then grows quiet. The water skin rests against its support with the seam turned upward. Nothing needs to be decided in this moment. The road already known lies ahead, and the day's heat has gone from the stones. Rope, leather, bell, and ground hold the same quiet arrangement beneath the familiar stars. At the well edge, the worn place in the stone holds the memory of many ropes. A water skin waits beside a closed mouth. The queue has thinned, water lies below, and the rope is ready for the next easy lowering. Farther out, the ground cools beneath the stars. A bell gives one soft note from the resting camels, and the sound settles among the palms already seen in the dark. Two salt slabs rest as a balanced pair, their wrapping drawn close and their ropes lying evenly. The camel stands beneath the quiet weight without needing the old arithmetic explained again. Nearby, a folded tally has been put away. The bell at the animal's neck moves once. Its small sound joins the familiar creak of rope and the remembered touch of cooling ground. The paired load stays level, and the loose end of rope rests beside the wrapped corners. The well edge, the coiled rope, and the watched water skin remain in their ordinary places. Above them, The same modest stars give enough light to keep shapes distinct. A dark line of palms rests beyond the ground. The salt load is secure. The camel bell is still. Each earlier task has reached its stopping place, and no new road needs to open. The rope lies ready. The water remains below, and the cooling stones keep the last familiar shapes. Now the stars, rope, water skin, salt load, well edge, camel bell, and cooling ground may remain together without further work. The knot holds. The seam is dry. The balanced load does not move. Water waits below the stone. The last bell fades, and the familiar dark settles over every object already known. The coiled rope keeps its place beside the skin. The salt slabs remain paired. The cooling ground reaches the well edge, and the stars stay above the quiet line.